Let's go! Aaron Anderson decommitted. How many more recruits will LSU lose now with the Ed Orgeron news? And an even deeper question, and I'm going to need your help on this today, guys, is how important is it that LSU quickly hires their next head coach so they can land on more recruits this next cycle? The first is yes, recruiting is the most important thing for each program. And there's no other way around it. You got to have the 4 and 5 star framework of a team in order to obviously win a national championship. However, it is not so important for this class to maximize whatever just in the sake of quickly naming a coach. For a couple of reasons, okay? Number one is it is going to be highly unlikely that LSU gets a coach before the end of their early signing period anyway. So if you want to go get a coach that is currently coaching a contender, whether that be Mel Tucker, whether that be Lane Kiffin, or even James Franklin, it's going to be tough unless, of course, you are getting a retired coach like Chris Peterson or Bob Stoops who would be able to step in right away, which, once again, is highly unlikely. The coaches you're going after are dead set on coaching their teams the rest of the season. So that's one of the downsides of the early signing period is that a lot of the coaches are still going to be coaching their team to begin with. So the likelihood of rushing for that is going to be tough anyway. Number two is even if you do get a coach before the early signing period, the likelihood that they are able to establish the connections for whichever recruits in order for them to actually go to LSU is very slim because, look, there's other coaches that have been recruiting the elite prospects for years now that are still at their school. So would a recruit, let's say a 5-star like Denver Harris, choose to go to LSU, which will have a new coach and with like 2 weeks notice, over Alabama, who's been recruiting him for years, and Nick Saban is still the coach? Well, we just have to come to the realization that a lot of these 5 stars that we really want, it's going to be really hard to get them anyway. So understand that rushing the coach to before the early signing period is going to be tough to land these 50-50 4 and 5 stars anyway. So I just don't get the point of rushing it just for the sake of recruiting. You also need to factor in this, that yes, recruiting is very important, but LSU was lucky to have a really good recruiting class in the class of 2021. In fact, it is pretty daggum certain that this class will be one of the best that have ever played at LSU. I could argue that from just strictly looking at true freshman production, this class is the best true freshman class you will ever see at LSU simply because of all the injuries and players outplaying older players on the team. They're just really, really good. So that obviously helps soften the blow because these guys are going to be at your program for at least 2 more seasons. And factor in that the class of 2020 actually took a step forward this year as well. It is all pretty good news for LSU. So you're going to be bringing in a roster that already has a bunch of really young, talented players, which means the class of 2022 isn't going to be as important. Now, I will say this, that was not the case last year. The class of 2021 needed to be a home run, and it looks as if it will be a home run with players like Jack Besh, BTJ, Mason Smith, Sage Ryan, and the list goes on and on and on. So, Garrett Dellinger, or whoever you want to mention. So, LSU already has a young, fruitful roster anyway, and let's be honest, no matter who the coach is going to be, you're still going to have some 2022 prospects want to play at LSU regardless of who the coach will be, right? So take a guy like Fitzgerald West, a 3-star to Lafayette. Well, his dream was to actually play at LSU. The same thing is somewhat true with Bo Bordelon, who is an LSU legacy. And then we get to the more elite players in the class of 2022, such as a Walker Howard and a Will Campbell and an Emory Jones. Well, those are the guys that you really got to make sure stay on board, right? we get to this point right here that not all positions are created equal. So Aaron Anderson decommitted. Yes, that stunk, but he decommitted at wide receiver, which is an ever-ending fountain of talent at LSU. Coy Moore transferred. Nobody's going to blink, and I think Coy's going to go somewhere else and catch 60 or 70 balls. He's really good. But, he just got outperformed by some younger, more talented players. And the same thing is true. This team just lost Kayshon Boutte, but they had Jeray Jenkins able to step up. And take Malik Neighbors, for instance, the highest-rated wide receiver I've ever scouted. And once again, I'm an amateur scout. I'm not that sharp when it comes to things like this. But really, JoJo Earl was that guy. And he ended up flipping to Alabama. And when he flipped to Alabama, it opened another slot for Malik Neighbors. And it turned out that LSU could end up getting the better end of that transaction there. So, yes, for some reason, LSU is just always going to have like the deepest fountain of talent at wide receiver, no matter who leaves, no matter who. And this is a team that just lost Terrace Marshall, Jamar Justin, just in the past couple of seasons, and that doesn't include guys like Racey McMath and so on and so on. LSU is always going to be fine at wide receiver. So factor in that not all positions are created equal, and you then get down to the guys that you absolutely, more than likely, near 100% need to have. And really, in this cycle, I view 4 of those guys as those types of guys that are currently committed right now, and that is Walker Howard, Will Campbell, Emory Jones, and LaTerrence Welch, the in-state 4-star corner who I think will play a lot in year 1. Jake Johnson, obviously a lot's going to come down to what Max wants to do. He's going to help out, but once again, Jake Johnson is a receiver, more so than he is a tight end. So, yeah, as great as I think Jake Johnson's going to be, honestly, but really the quarterback and those 2 great offensive linemen are by far the 3 most important players, along with LaTerrence Welch, because LSU will be losing some depth at corner this offseason. And, Jadarian Rom and some other good players are look to still be on board at this point, but you never really know. Take Demario Tolan, for instance. If Blake Baker isn't retained with the next staff, Demario Tolan is probably just going to follow wherever Blake Baker goes. So, even though Demario Tolan says he is still locked in with LSU. So, as far as individual players are concerned, I know we focus so much on these individual players, but the truth of the matter is really only the 5-star quarterback is what really moves the needle, because LSU can make up with that from other positions. They can make up some ground at some other positions in this class. It's just really hard to replace a 5-star quarterback, and I have a hard time believing Walker Howard doesn't end up being still a part of this 2022 cycle at LSU. So, yeah, keep that in mind that, once again, it also applies to recruiting, that quarterbacks are just that much more valuable. And that's the thing. There are obviously some very important players in the state of Louisiana, Jacoby Matthews, Shaz Preston, Le'Veon Moss, Kendrick Law, that you obviously still want to land. Even a guy like Osbury, who's a really good player out of U High. Those guys are obviously very key pieces. I still think LSU does a decent enough job to land most of those guys. And let's just say LSU has a recruiting class. Right now they're ranked 12th. Let's just say they're just outside the top 10. They can fight their way back into that top 10 for the 2023 cycle, which is also loaded with a ton of talent in the state of Louisiana. And keep this in mind, there is a new rule in college football that will help LSU replenish its roster anyway, as now with the transfer portal, you can sign up to 32 players per cycle. It used to be that transfers counted against your 25-player scholarship limit, and this will help LSU out in 2 ways. The first is LSU will now be able to sign more 3-star Louisiana kids that really want to go to LSU. And some of those guys include a guy like Jordan Allen. If LSU wants to eventually offer him, he could flip from Penn State to LSU. And that list goes on and on of whichever 3-star player. Khalif Edwards, a linebacker who's currently committed to UL. You can pick and choose whichever one you want to, pick out. But because you can sign just 25 high school players and have 7 spots for graduate transfers, that will allow you to be more aggressive in handing out offers for this cycle. So I think LSU is in a good spot there, and they're also going to be in a good spot for the transfer portal. I think LSU will hit the portal hard. I think at least 7 players will transfer from this team this offseason. Let's just say even if it's 5 guys, that can still mean you can get no less than 5 players in the transfer portal. So I think LSU will be fine when it comes to the portal as well. So I do think this idea that you have to hurry up and get a coach for the sake of this next recruiting class is far-fetched because, and this is a very key thing, what has been LSU's issue over the past couple of seasons? A lot of it is talent. They did lose a lot from the 2019 team, and then they had the opt-outs on top of that and all the coaches. So, yeah, they lost a lot of player talent. But I can argue LSU's archaic scheme and decision-making process, if that was slightly better, LSU could have beaten Mississippi State. LSU could have beaten Missouri. LSU could have beaten Auburn this season in these competitive games where LSU was really, really bad when it comes to making in-game decisions and in-game adjustments. So that comes into strategy. And it is more important to make sure you hire a head coach who is a sharper in-game strategist than it is to hire just somebody who is an elite recruiter, like a guy like Ed Orgeron. I just honestly think rushing to get a next head coach for one recruiting cycle when the 2023 crop looks to be really good, when your 2021 and 2020 crop looks really good, and you're not going to end up getting a disastrous 2022 cycle either. It's going to be, I'll say this, I'm pretty safe in saying that LSU will have at least a number 15th ranked class in 2022. They'll be fine. Recruiting will be fine. Get the head coach right. Don't think that rushing your decision to see if Quincy Wiggins or Le'Veon Moss would decide to come to LSU, that is not as important as making sure that that head coach is good. Now, both of those young men, those are just 2 examples, are really good players and will probably be NFL draft picks. But still, it's not as important as getting that head coach right. It just isn't. And to think otherwise is crazy. It really is. Hope you enjoyed this recruiting breakdown today. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And, I think we're starting a live stream soon. Let's do it. Let's go. It is Power Hour LSU. Boom. Oh, we're doing lo mein tonight, Liz. No, not lo mein. We're doing steak tonight, Liz. No, we're not doing steak. Oh, we're doing pasta tonight, Liz.